The AmericasDemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, is made possible by contributions from our listeners. Want to do more? Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click Donate. And thank you for allowing us to be your voice. This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Fred Harris, once the chair of the Democratic National Committee and the leading populist in America, says the party must rebuild from the ground up. Republican ex-diplomat Mike Ussery says Vladimir Putin is playing a weak hand very strongly. And Bill Press talks with Pete Buttigieg, a dark-horse candidate for chair of the Democratic National Committee. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Fred Harris, once called the godfather of populism and a former chair of the DNC, urges the party to rebuild from the bottom up with all its interest groups pulling together. And we say hello to Fred Harris, who was a U.S. Senator from Oklahoma, chairman of the Democratic National Committee, a candidate for president, and a professor of political science at the University of New Mexico. He continues to be a leader in progressive causes. Fred Harris, thank you very much for joining us again on AmericasDemocrats.org.
You bet. Good to talk with you.
Nice to speak with you as always. A recent and well-read article in Politico quotes Jesse Jackson as having called you the godfather of populism. Do you accept that title?
Well, Jesse Jackson actually said that, which I appreciate. I've written way back then a couple of books about the new populism. I think the first one was along in 71. And then one thereafter in 72 or 3 called the New Populism. So that's the origin of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, are you happy with his giving you that title of Godfather of Populism?
Yes, I like it. I've been a great partner always with, I think, one of the best populists in the country, Jim Hightower down in Texas. And we sort of developed together the idea of new populism and what it entailed. It's really the same thing as the old populism. It calls for a fairer distribution of wealth and income and power. It's against concentrated economic power, which translates into political power in this country. That's what new populism is and stands for, and the kind of thing that Jim Hightower and I have been advocating for a long time.
Well, now it's interesting because, and I'm wondering how we should all be defining populism, since Trump supporters claim to be populist, as did Sanders supporters, as did the Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street. So what's the answer there? How do we define populism?
Well, Bernie Sanders certainly is a populist, and so was the Occupy Wall Street group. They were trying to do something about concentrated economic, political, and political power, and that's what populism is. In Latin America, the word populist has really always meant demagogue and demagoguery, and that's the way a lot of our media handles it. So they say anybody who's demagoguing and making sort of baseless appeals to the general public is a populist. George Wallace, to some people, was a populist, and Donald Trump was a populist. Well, they're not like the old populists, William Jennings Bryan and his crowd, and they're certainly not what I would call populists.
We're speaking with Fred Harris, former U.S. Senator from Oklahoma, of course, the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, a candidate for president, and professor of political science at the University of New Mexico. How can progressives expect to win any big battles, given the barriers of conservative judges, a gerrymandered House, and an unrepresentative Senate?
Well, it's tough. I mean, democracy, it's hard work. and we're in a really tough spot. But what I know is that most people in the country, and all the polls show this, support what I advocate, what Bernie Sanders advocates, what Elizabeth Warren advocates. That is, for example, a fair tax structure, which, as I used to say when I was running for president, would take the rich off welfare and make them pay their fair share. A minimum wage where people can really a living wage, people can make a living by working. And those are the kinds of things that people in this country are for. And that's what the new populism, Bernie Sanders, for example, or Elizabeth Warren, as I said, and people like Sherrod Brown in the Senate from Ohio advocate.
Now, in your lifetime, the little people, if you will, went from New Deal Democrats to right-wing Republicans. How has that happened?
Well, I think that part of it was just inevitable and nothing we could do about it. For example, I was I'm the lone surviving member of President Johnson's National Convention or National Commission on Civil Disorders, the Kerner Commission, and we, as you remember, back in 1968 issued that famous report, the Kerner Report, which said, among other things, our nation is moving toward two societies, one white, one black, separate and unequal, and we call for great new federal programs to combat racism and poverty. But my father, who was a small farmer down in southwestern Oklahoma, third grade education, he loved me, but the way he heard what we said in the Kerner reports was, Mr. Harris, you ought to pay more taxes to help poor black people that are rioting in Detroit. Well, that was not our message, because we believe, I do, that people like my dad were already paying too much tax. And we were as interested in him as we were in African Americans and the poor people generally. But we, for example, we'll just take that case of the Kerner Report. We asked Lyndon Johnson to give us another 6 months of life once we reported, so that we could explain the basis of our recommendations, so that ordinary people could see it, and that this was not a zero-sum game, that if you helped black people, that didn't mean that you shouldn't also take an interest in working-class white people and poor white people. But Lyndon Johnson would not give us that, and then somebody leaked the report, and the Washington Post and others published it with headlines that said, white racism cause of black riots, Commission says. And I think starting from that, with Nixon's playing upon those kinds of fears and angers that developed at that time as a result of the riots, and with his Southern strategy, I think we began to fail to get through to working class white people whose own interests were also bound up with the kinds of things that we were advocating and that the populists now do advocate. But we've got to pay more attention to them. That is, get our message across better. They believe generally in the same things we believe in: a minimum wage, a living wage, fair taxes for the rich, and programs like medical care as a right. The country believes in that. So do working class and poor white people. But we've got to help them see their interests are at stake in these issues.
Mm-hmm. Now, you were a chair of the Democratic National Committee back when the party controlled the White House and both houses of Congress. What kind of leader does the DNC need? A celebrity spokesperson, a face, or is it more a nuts and bolts type?
Well, I think it needs all of that. when I took over the Democratic Party, I agreed to do that after our disastrous convention in Chicago in 1968. And I agreed to do that only if I could get the unanimous vote of the members of the Democratic National Committee. And I set out then to talk to every one of them. I talked to several of them often, and more than once. And finally, one last woman who came over, who'd been anti-war and against Johnson and Humphrey, she finally came in, and I was unanimously elected. And I took that job because I wanted to reform the party and make it become what it called itself, a Democratic Party. It was not that. I appointed a reform commission headed by Senator George McGovern and made up their membership in such a way as to assure the reforms they came up with, make the party democratic in all of its processes, the election of its delegates to the National Convention, too, full representation of women and minorities, which had not been the case, and incidentally outlawing what today are called superdelegates, people who are automatic delegates to the National Convention because of some other position they hold. All that happened as a result of that reform, although after I was out, they backslid a little and approved again some superdelegates. But now that this last convention in Philadelphia has required that system be changed again, either take away their votes or do away with superdelegates, and they're going to do that. But right now, what we need is people that want to be active in policy formation and in politics. They need to get involved in the grassroots of the Democratic Party. We ought to start from the bottom up. It is. I don't have much use for people who go around talking about, well, the Democratic Party is the one that causes us so much problems and so forth. Listen, the Democratic Party is now far easier to take over than it is to beat it. And what I think we ought to do, we've got all these groups like Move On and Organization for America, used to be the Obama organization, the DFA that used to be the Dean organization, and now the new or Our Revolution of the Bernie people and so forth, all headed in the same direction. I'd like to say all raising their own separate money, having their own separate staffs and so forth. I'd like to see them somehow meld and get together, or even meld into the Democratic Party itself, and make it more the instrument of the people. That's what needs to be done, and from the grassroots up, and then elect a person who is a person who believes in the platform of the Democratic Party and of the kind of populist platform that most of the people in the country now support.
Rebuild from the bottom up. Fred Harris, former senator from Oklahoma. He was the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, candidate for president, and professor of political science at the University of New Mexico, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Fred, as always, we appreciate your time with us and look forward to having you back again soon.
Thank you.
You are quite welcome. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen to this americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats. But we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.
This Social Security measure, I believe that we must pass legislation to provide medical care.
This is our tradition. When our grandparents came to America, it was the Democratic Party which said, welcome. It was the Democratic Party, the party of Roosevelt and Truman and Kennedy and others, who said that America belonged to all its people, not just a handful of the rich or a few giant corporations. That's why great leaders like FDR fought so hard for Social Security, and why JFK stood up to the insurance companies and their Republican allies to get Medicare. It's not just one thing, or one time, in one place. It's about a whole history of standing up to the Republicans and saying someone has to be on the side of regular working people in America. Whether it's defending Social Security or just the way your loved ones are treated on the job. That's what the Democratic Party is all about. And that's why this message has been brought to you by the Democratic Party. Working people like you and me.
Paid for by 21st Century Democrats. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Mike Ussery is a Republican former ambassador who says he hopes the GOP Congress and Trump's national security team will wind up doing the right thing. We'll talk to him more about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Breaking news. An amazing new school for political activists is training thousands of people to be community organizers using Saul Alinsky's classic manual, Rules for Radicals. Called the Grassroots Leadership Academy, the school gives how-to lessons in everything from mounting successful protest actions to recruiting middle-of-the-road voters. Progressives need this, but wait, who's that hiding behind Saul Alinsky? Good grief, it's the Koch brothers. Yes, this grassroots outfit has been set up by the gabillionaire Koch boys to train cadres of right-wing corporatists to spread their ideological laissez-faire dust across the land. The academy is run through Americans for Prosperity, Charlie's and David's political wing, which put up $3 million to get it going. About 10,000 people have gone through some of the training sessions in 36 states. The brothers' grandiose scheme is to take over the Republican Party and use it as their tool to rebuild America itself into a Kochlandia ruled by the super-rich. Even their money, however, can't overcome one huge barrier: their message. The Academy's curriculum, for example, is loaded with such corporate nonsense as a course titled The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. Attendees were indoctrinated with two overarching lessons. One, freewheeling corporate power, unrestrained by labor, environmental, or other public protections? Good. 2. Social Security, unemployment benefits, and other social programs? Bad. This is Jim Hightower saying Koch College for right-wing social engineers is peddling a status quo agenda of corporate elitism, which the vast majority of Americans are now openly rebelling against. It's like trying to sell chicken salad made of chicken manure. There's not enough sugar in the world to make people swallow that.
If you'd like more of Jim Hightower's real populism, check out the Hightower Lowdown. Jim's monthly newsletter gives you the real lowdown on which corporations, by name, are doing what to the middle class, our environment, and our democracy. Each month, the Hightower Lowdown brings you facts you didn't know, along with actions you can take to fight back. It also comes with a sense of humor. Hightower believes we can fight the gods and still have fun. Plus, get this, it's cheap. Only $15 brings you 12 issues a year. For real populism, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Mainstream Republican foreign policy expert Mike Ussery wonders whether the system will modify Trump's style or whether the president will be a wrecking ball taking destruction to the outer limits. And we say hello to Mike Ussery, former ambassador to Morocco under Presidents Reagan and Bush. He is a veteran of presidential campaigns, including the 1988 Bush-Quayle campaign and the 2000 Bush-Cheney campaign. Since serving as U.S. ambassador, Mike has an international business career and is a founder of several international companies and nonprofit organizations. Mike Ussery, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thank you for having me back, Jim.
Always nice to speak with you, Mike. As a Republican and former diplomat who told us last year you were very concerned about both Trump and Hillary Clinton, are you distressed at all at the election results?
Well, I was terribly distressed with the campaign. I didn't think it was enlightening at all. I thought it was a lot of heat and very little light all around. And so I was worried where we may go, and right now we're going to find out where things may go. No matter which side won, I had doubts about what they're doing and would do, particularly in the area of foreign policy and bringing the nation together. So those are the big the big hurdles. So, no, I wasn't distressed at all about what happened, and I share with you candidly that I was pleased to see the Clintons off the stage, to see them after 25 years of public service, though, trying something new, trying something different. We'll see where it goes. I don't think any of us are clear on the exact policy intents. And I look for the GOP Congress to do the right things and also to have a good balance factor with the White House. But, we're going to find out pretty soon at this point and see where it all leads. But, I enjoy hearing debates about popular vote versus electoral college, and I can't think of anybody who said they really enjoyed the campaign. But nope, I'm pleased to have change and very encouraged by the new cabinet.
Okay, now is Trump what early communists called a useful idiot, or what Hillary Clinton called a puppet of Putin?
No, I think he's the opposite of that. I think he has a very decisive leadership style, and I've seen some of the puppets. I'm old enough to actually met the Ceausescu's on a State Department mission way back in the late '80s. Now those were puppets, even though the Ceausescu's, as in your audience will know, tried to keep some distance from Moscow. Bulgaria, Albania, those were where what the communists would call puppets were. No, I think the concerns that people have in the United States, particularly many of your listeners, is the president is so decisive and so action-oriented and sometimes terribly surprising. I think they're not worried about him as much about what is he going to be too placating with the Russians as they are about the idea of what decision will he surprise us with tomorrow. And I think that's part of the nature, and we're going to only know over time if the system modifies the president's style or he goes like a 2,000-pound wrecking ball constantly and is just takes disruption to the outer limits.
How do you size up Putin? Is he a strong leader looking out for Russia's national interest, or is he just a thug?
Well, I think he's a very strong leader, and the consolidation of power which he's done in about. I remember actually went with Senator McCain to Russia back in the mid '90s, back when we were really. Before Putin was on the national stage in Russia, he was known. He was over in St. Petersburg at the time, but we were over there because we were trying to work on anti-corruption. We were trying to work on the judicial issues in the system over in Russia, and of course democracy. And I remember that 1996 trip. Times were tough in Russia. Out of that came the nationalism that we've seen, and that brought with it, that lifted up Putin, who is probably a brilliant politician, both strategically and tactfully, and I think we've got to take him totally seriously. I think he's got a position of strength. I think he's playing his hand stronger than any of us would analyze that he should be able to with a bad economy and oil prices down. So let's say he's done an amazing job at playing a weak hand very strongly around the world, and I think we've got a role in trying to limit that.
For 75 years, the United States has been the predominant player in world affairs. Has that era come to an end?
Well, I sadly think we have to admit that the world order that was created after World War II, that's either come to an end or it's falling apart. So we can't put that back together. We can't just put tape and glue on it and keep that going. So somehow we're trying to deal with dozens of serious issues around the world. I mean, really hundreds of real problems around the world. At the same time, trying to figure out a framework on how to do it, who to work with, who should be at the table for negotiations, what should we be concerned about negotiating. And I am worried that that the administration is going to be overwhelmed with so many problems built up out there. But can we still be the most important, powerful, and leading force in the world for sure? That's still, I think, what's at stake here over the next 4 years to a decade is us not only strengthening our position, but doing it to do good in the places that we can. We can easily hit overreach. We can easily stretch ourselves too thin in many ways, including politically. I mean, there's only just so much time for one president, one secretary of state. But this is the challenge of our time, and I'm not even sure that we've got a clear vision of where we want this all to go. And until we have that, well, we might say it's going to be hard to get there. We still have our core values of individualism, democracy, core values of our nation, and that we will act on those. I think we're all agreeing we're out of the nation building. And I think looking back on the Trump campaign, how the president plays this is something that we're not clear about right now at all. I mean, I think personality-wise, as a leader, I think he's an individual who say, put it all on my plate. I'll solve it all. I'll lead it all. I want to be the leader, not just of the free world. I'm the leader of the world. But on the other hand, all the talk about what it means to say America first, and we're going to be pulling back from around the world, is something that's hard to understand. I'm not sure it fits with his personality. This idea of we're going to fight everybody on trade, we're going to destroy ISIS, but otherwise we're going to pull ourselves in. When at the same time during the campaigns, he was saying that our lack of action in some cases, like Syria, was part of the problem, that we were in a weaker position from a foreign policy standpoint and national security. So it's got to be sorted out. But at the end of the day, it's not just about which way the president plays it. It is what's at stake and who's going to put together a new global vision. And as you see, even things that we thought about 10 years ago as building and growing, like the European Union, now they're under threat and they may dissolve. I'm not saying I'm against that. Let's see where it all goes.
We're speaking with Mike Ussery, former ambassador to Morocco under Presidents Reagan and Bush. In terms of U.S. influence around the world, did President Obama strengthen or weaken it?
Well, at risk of upsetting some people and also not wishing to prolong a debate that I think history is going to make the judgment of, I think the president's weakest area that he's going to be seen as historically is going to be in foreign policy. And I think the bottom line result of that, it comes from the view that Bush and Cheney did too much and got us into a lot of problems, created some problems we didn't, and put gas on some other fires out there, particularly in the Mideast. And so he was going to step back, do less, and I think he underengaged and didn't step in at sometimes when he should have, and then two times when he really was very actively involved in the Mideast, one with the deal with Iran and the other with Libya. There was a feeling that those were mistakes. I think they were. And at the same time, early in his administration, we were seeing things bouncing around day by day when Arab Spring broke out, and look at what happened in Egypt. And one day, are we more sympathetic with the protesters, or trying to help our friend, the Mubarak government? And then, out of that came Morsi, and Morsi then ends up tossed out because he was rigid as a religious political figure. And so I think it's going to be hard on the president, not only my view, but I think more importantly, historians' view, and even most importantly, I think it makes our options going forward a little tougher. I think we're going to have to commit more. I still fundamentally believe in the concept that I first learned. I think it goes back to Kennedy and Eisenhower, but peace through strength. But as we did had to deal with or saw in the red line on Syria, it's a tough, nasty world out there, unfortunately. And if you're not willing to make some tough decisions like that, and sometimes use the military, there are a lot of bad players and actors out there who just see things as open opportunities. All they see is their ability to then do more, grab more power, hurt people in the process, corruption. So that's my my view of how it is, and therefore where President Obama came up short.
And Mike, the foreign policy of Trump, such as it is, has at this point focused on Russia, China, and the Middle East. But where does this leave Africa, Latin America, and many other countries in the eyes of a president who will be preoccupied with those other issues, and, as you mentioned, who says the U.S. will pull back from foreign engagements?
It's a great question, and in the past year I've been out in the field working on refugee issues. I really feel good about the work, but that also means that I've seen how bad the problem is, and you start thinking about, okay, there's still huge numbers of refugees out there that are more in camps, not even permanent facilities. They're not all up in Europe. There's still a lot of people trapped in places like around the old Athens airport. And so what are we going to do on the refugees? And when you talk refugees, also you look back, there are refugee situations in the world where the refugees have been living in the same places for 35 and even 40 or more years in a few places around the world. You've got people who were born as refugees in camps and are now grandparents in refugee camps. So who's going to deal with that? Who's going to deal with issues that are probably most people never heard of, like the Western Sahara and trying to get through the King of Morocco's autonomy plan, which is what I favor, or independence and recognition for Somaliland, which broke off from Somalia when Somalia fell apart in the early 90s and was part of old British colonization. So these are things I want to see, and I can't imagine. I think about Africa and the risk or the downside of having to deal with some big, huge issues you mentioned: Russia, China, North Korea, the Mideast. It could result in a lot of serious neglect for Africa, Latin America. I think Latin America has pretty much gone their own way. I think Latin America is one part of the world that, even as close as they are, particularly South America, and is, not speaking about Mexico or parts of Central America so much, but in South America, it's like we could be on the other side of the world. They don't expect much from us. They don't see us doing much. They're out on their own course, and it's not always one that we'd like to see in some of these countries, and certainly not in terms of development. And Southeast Asia, we've got to do more over there. So I'm very worried. The only way I see to handle this is a model that I think President Reagan had with Secretary Shultz, and they empowered people under Secretary Shultz to do great things in different regions around the world. And out of that, in fact, it was somebody at the assistant secretary level, Ambassador Crocker, who really put together the deal to end apartheid in South Africa. But I'm not sure I see this new presidential team and the president willing to delegate so much authority down the ladder. But let's see. I hope so.
Okay. Mike Ussery, former ambassador to Morocco under Presidents Reagan and Bush, and of course, since serving as the U.S. ambassador, he has an international business career and founder of several international companies and nonprofit organizations, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Mike, as always, we appreciate your time and look forward to doing it again soon.
Thank you again, Jim, very much. Always a pleasure.
Nice talking with you. Take care. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to keep the AmericasDemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, on the air, and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now Bill Press talks DNC politics with Pete Buttigieg, who is running to become party chair.
Big decision facing the Democratic National Committee. Who is going to lead the DNC, lead the Democratic Party, into its kind of, everybody admits it needs to be re-energized, rebuilt, maybe new direction, because the party's in pretty bad shape right now. There are 7 candidates, including, we welcome to our program, the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, and a candidate for DNC chair, Pete Buttigieg. Good to see you last night at the debate. You did very well. You didn't tell us last night that today's your birthday. But happy birthday.
Thank you.
And what a way to celebrate, starting out right here.
Well, at least it's the last day of the Obama administration, not the first day of the Trump administration. Got that going for me.
All right, we'll give you that.
I had a real breakdown, by the way, when I realized that when Trump leaves office, I'm going to be 40. Or at the end of his 4-year term, I'm going to be 40. I freaked out.
Yeah. So you're from South Bend, Indiana.
That's
Did
right.
you go to Notre Dame?
I didn't. No.
What?
I know. I went to the Notre Dame of the East, but grew up going to the football games, and obviously it's a big part of our life in South Bend.
Right. So why would people look to a mayor from a relative small town in the Rust Belt, right, in the middle of the country, to lead the Democratic National Committee?
Well, first of all, because I'm from a community that has a lot of the kinds of people that our party has struggled to connect with. You know, my county ought to be a reliably blue county. It went 50-50 in this last presidential election. And I think these are folks who really ought to be Democrats. You look at the economics, you look at what the Democratic Party has stood for. They should be voting with us, but we're having trouble touching down right now. I think I know how to do that. I know how to do that because I've helped get other people elected, in addition, of course, to winning my own campaigns there. So I think that experience is important. I think the experience in local government is important at a moment when all 7 of us are promising that we're going to return the center of gravity of our organizing back to state and local government and local parties and state parties. But I'm the one who's actually living that in the trenches right now as we speak. And also, it's a small city, but I have a lot of executive responsibility. You know, the buck stops on my desk. We're not in one of the systems of government where you have a city manager or anything like that. So I'm chief executive of a $300 million a year organization, more than 1,000 employees, and I'm responsible for the lives and well-being of 100,000 people. I know what it's like to have that kind of responsibility, to organize a team to get something done, and I'm proud of our turnaround story in South Bend. It's the same kind of turnaround story I want to write for the Democratic Party.
If there was a theme last night in the debate, to me, it was we have to look outside of Washington for leadership of the DNC.
That's right. Look, the solutions for this party are not going to come from Washington. I don't mean to insult anybody around here, but look, we have had a lot of trouble connecting with people in terms of their actual lived experience. We talk about what goes on in the Beltway and the politicians as though they were what really matters. Politicians only matter because the decisions they make affect people in their real lives. And for me, all of this stuff is personal. This isn't theoretical for me. Things from Affordable Care Act, and I talked last night about what that means in my family, to things like climate change, which for me is not about ice sheets and polar bears. It is about our neighborhoods. This summer we had a rainfall, most rain we ever got in our history. It was about 2.5 inches until one night in August we got 7.5 inches.
In one night.
In one night. Homes were destroyed. Statistically, it's a 1,000-year rainfall. But who here believes it's really going to be 1,000 years before that happens again? I saw the families whose lives were derailed by this. These issues are not abstract. They hit home, and we got to learn to talk about them that way again.
What's the job of the DNC chair as you see it?
Well, part of it, of course, is the message part, being in the media, articulating a message. But I don't think that most of this job is about being on TV. This is an organizing job. This is about making sure that we have the mechanics right, doing a lot of unsexy, unglamorous blocking and tackling kind of work to get the party in gear. That means making sure that the handshake between the mothership and the state parties is working right. Not just sending money and all the candidates for chair are promising to get more resources out to the state, but making sure the money and the people are organized in the right way. And of course, it's making sure that we do have that kind of resource base to get the job done.
20 years ago, I left California to come to Washington, D.C. I still consider myself a Californian, not a Washingtonian. But I was chair of the Democratic Party in California. What role do you think the state parties play? Howard Dean, who was there last night in the audience, at one time had a 50-state strategy where he really built up and gave money.
That's right, and I think we've got to have that. We've got to embrace that kind of strategy. But it's not just copy-pasting the 50-state strategy, because we've got to evolve with the times. But that is the point where we've got to begin. Look, the state chairs, as you know, because you were one, know what's going on in their states, and what's happening in the different states is different. I've been talking to a lot of the various state chairs, and not just as a matter of politics. Obviously, politically, what plays in Kansas is different from California, but also mechanically, just the reality of what is needed from the DNC. Right, the Oregon State Party might be able to use the funds from the DNC to create a dedicated program they wouldn't be able to do otherwise, while the North Dakota State Party would rely on those funds simply to keep the lights on and have a full-time staff.
Do you believe that the DNC during this last primary campaign was tilting and the staff tilting in one direction?
Well, look, we wouldn't be having this conversation if there weren't problems. I think we've got to look forward and establish a way to make sure, especially as we go into the next presidential primary process, it is very clear that no one has a thumb on the scale.
Well, I know that all of you wanted to avoid this question, but some have said that this race for DNC chair is really pitting the Bernie Sanders people against the Hillary Clinton people.
Yeah,
What's your response to that?
I don't think that's fair to the candidates, and I also think that we just have to get past that. And part of the reason I got into this is, I'm not anybody's guy. I'm getting into this because I believe I'm here to deliver a fresh start, and we've got to transcend not just that false choice, but a whole bunch of false choices that have been presented to us. Another one I'm very concerned about in the internal conversation in the party right now is the idea that speaking to a lot of white working class voters that we seem to have lost touch with somehow requires us to abandon the moral foundation of our party and our commitment to racial and social justice. We not only can, we must be speaking in terms of values that make sense across our coalition, not speaking to elements of that coalition one group at a time. And if we fall for that trap, if we go into that false choice, we're going to be even more divided, and it's bad for business.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Fred Harris, Mike Ussery, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.